Systems engaged. Frequencies synchronized. Prepare for incoming transmission. Coming to you from somewhere in the multiverse, this is Robots from Tomorrow. This show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and as always your podcatcher of choice. For the full archive featuring over 800 episodes of comics and comics-friendly content like interviews, book discussions, and freeform tomfoolery, please go to robotsfromtomorrow.net. Here is your host, Greg.
Hello, and welcome to Robots from Tomorrow. My name is Greg. Thanks for joining me. Today, we're talking with Portuguese cartoonist Joana Mosi about her new book, Physical Education, coming out on May 5th from Pow Pow Press. But before we get to that, I have a bit of scheduling business to go over first. As in, Robots from Tomorrow will be coming to your listening device of choice on a weekly basis from now until the end of May. I'll leave the back half of the month a mystery for the time being, but here's what you can look forward to over the next few weeks. Next week, on April 30th, is the second part of my interview with cartoonist, historian, and Kickstarter king Steve Bissette. We talk about the origins of his horror anthology Taboo, the late 80s comic scene, creator rights, comics as political protest, and a lot more. 2 days after that, on May 2nd, we celebrate Free Comic Book Day by giving you not one, but two remastered episodes from The Vault. These two cover the epic lettering conversation between Aditya Bidikar and John Workman I was fortunate enough to be a part of back in 2022. As with all of these remastered episodes, the audio quality has been improved, and the runtime has been reduced without losing anything that made these episodes special in the first place. Now, these two episodes were chosen specifically to set up the following week's guest. Aditya comes back to the studio on May 7th for an interview about his mainstream comics writing debut with the Image Comics miniseries In Your Skin. Bollywood body horror meets erotic fiction in this one, and we talk about all that and more. And finally, on May 14th, cartoonist J. Marshall Smith is on deck to talk about the intersection of space, spirituality, and robotics with his recent graphic novel, Testament. We get deep in this one, folks. We talk about a story with a robot protagonist I'm too engrossed to make even one robot pun in the whole episode deep. So that's what the next few weeks looks like from our little slice of the multiverse. But for now, we have my talk with Joana Mosi about comics in Portugal, the necessity of failure, and just how many pages it takes to show a proper cigarette being made. My guest today is an award-winning Portuguese cartoonist whose work is only recently becoming available in English. And that timing matters, because until Pow Pow Press started publishing her books, The Mongoose and now Physical Education internationally, there was basically no way for English language readers to come across it unless they happened to be at the right European festival at the right time, or at some other festival. And so I'm coming into this conversation with less background than usual for some of the same reasons. I mean, I like to listen to other interviews that my guests give, and she has a few of them out there, but they're in Portuguese, which I don't speak. There are a few written interviews in English, one of them by Pow Pow compatriot Francois Vigneault, that was very helpful, but there's not the treasure trove of information available on her as there is for somebody like Steve Bissette or Jim Rugg, for instance. So, disclaimer. This chat is going to be me doing more discovery work than usual in real time, but frankly, that's got me excited. Here's what I've come across so far. She's part of the growing Lisbon comic scene in Portugal. Paul Gravett called her previous book, The Mongoose, quote, formally experimental yet powerful, affecting narrative, unquote. She draws, she writes, she teaches. Her newest work, Physical Education, has been published in Portugal and was the first ever graphic novel to be a National Illustration Award of Portugal highlight book, but is getting its English language release through Pow Pow Press on May 5th. She is Joana Mosi. And like I said before, I'm excited to talk to her about that book and her work and fill in some of these gaps I have about her career thus far. Joana, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
What did I miss that we need to establish right off the bat?
I think that pretty much covers the main things. I don't remember anything else.
Okay, great. Mission accomplished. Cross that off the list. So Portugal is not a comics territory that I'm familiar with. What do you think I need to know about it to put it into proper context?
It's a broad question, but I'm glad that I'm getting more and more asked about it. It's a small niche. What I usually say is that unlike the French or maybe even the Italian, and I'm just speaking of like our European neighbors, we don't really have an industry. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of authors. what happens is that we have a very small community, or it used to be smaller in my opinion. I think it's getting bigger. But since we don't have an industry, that also means we don't have a specific style or a specific school or a specific way of doing things. And for me, that's an advantage. I can't speak for anybody because we all work so different. And I think that's one of the best things of the comic scene. We have a couple of authors that work internationally. I'm definitely not an exception. For example, you have Felipe Andrade, who's been awarded many times for Marvel and for making the beautiful Lila Star book, you know? So comics in Portugal is definitely not a new thing at all. We've been doing it since everybody else. But it's a small country, so we still have a lot to run. We have a language that is always a little bit of a barrier, but I think it's exciting right now. We have a massive underground scene and that has been imploding in the past 10 years. So I think it's an exciting place to be working. Of course, it's small and that brings with some consequences, but it's definitely diverse. I think that's the best thing about it.
That does sound exciting because, at least from my perspective, you are situated between so many larger, interesting comics territories and stuff. Obviously, you have Great Britain, but France and Italy and Spain and all of these different flavors. But you do have something that none of the others do. And I find that interesting. I think I said this before we started recording, but I'm going to mention it again. I have a bunch of questions, but I did not necessarily put them into the most easier to follow order. So I may jump around a little bit as you say stuff that I want to touch on. And I say that because talking about language, I had the opportunity to talk with another one of the creators last year at SPX, Boom?
Yeah.
God, I can never remember how to pronounce that. Anyway, I was talking with her about jellyfish and how she had worked with translators to have it translated in English, and she spoke English very well. And I was like, I wouldn't think you would need to have somebody else translate. Your English is very good. She had mentioned that it was because of localization and those sort of things. Now that you have work that is being translated into, well, physical education was already in Portuguese and French and whatever, but now that it's being translated in English and you speak English, talk about having your work translated into another language.
That's a good question, actually. I've been feeling, even I work with the same publisher for both French and English. It's a completely different approach to translate it to French or to translate it to English. I know that the main reason is because it's different markets. So translating is not just the literal action of translating. If it was, we have Google Translate and worse things than that, right?
Yes, we do.
But I think translating is not necessarily just making something in Portuguese become English, but it's finding the equivalent in the language. And language is much more just in finding a literal translation. That's where the translator work comes. So I work very close. Pow Pow works very close with me, and I think it's one of the things that I like the most about working with them. We go through the whole book, and when they're making the translation, both in French or in English, they constantly check on me of like, hey, in this bubble or in this dialogue, what's the intention here? What's she's trying to say? Because sometimes the same sentence you say in a way in Portuguese, but in English you have to say probably something different because the importance is the meaning or the message you want to come across with. And there are things that make sense in the Portuguese culture, but we have to find a different equivalent in the Canadian culture, for example, right? I heard, for example, in Inside Out, the Pixar film, there's a scene where the child is eating food that is meant to be disgusting. And I know in some countries that food is broccoli. In other countries, the food is another vegetable, is like carrots or whatever. So it's a little bit like that. It's not just finding a carrot in French. It's probably, okay, finding a vegetable that has the same meaning as a carrot, for example. And I really like the process. The book becomes kind of something else, but at the same time, no. There's a whole identity process around it. Since my books are very much about identity, and the identity is a key part to understand the story, it becomes a very delicate process to find a way to still have that identity present, even though the language is different. Not the language, the idiom is different. Yeah. So it's a big challenge. It's like a quite big challenge.
Even from that question, now I have two different places I want to go really quickly. So do you have to go back and letter that version
I
of it?
didn't handwrite it. I didn't handwrite it.
Oh,
I actually have a font that was made by my partner. He makes
oh,
typos
um,
based on my handwriting. Yes.
hmm.
So
Oh,
I
well,
basically
that's
hired them.
both yours and also convenient for digital. But you are sort of involved in that, engaging in your own work with
Yeah.
something different. What does that feel like? That sort of re-engaging with the work, like you've gotten it as something where in your native country you're like, this is the work, and it's like, okay, it needs to go out, so you need to go home again. And what was that process like?
That's actually a good question. And sometimes it's a bit painful, actually,
Mm,
because I get really detached of the books after they come out. It's like giving birth in a weird way from my way of making books. And I think for most people that engage in creative process, it means that you, during the creative process, you're obsessed with it, with the thing you're doing, whatever that
mhm,
is. So I get really obsessed with the thing. It becomes my life for a couple of years. And
mhm,
then when it comes out, my head needs to get away. So I'm already thinking either of the next project or of nothing at all.
mhm,
And having a translation, yes, makes you come back to it. And obviously, you already come as a different person. And I've found this in some other peers of mine. It's not an exclusive feeling of me, but I've talked
mhm,
with a lot of people that make comics too, of like that to fight the urge to change things.
mhm.
Besides translating, you're like, I have noticed that panel is still annoying me. Like, I need to redraw.
Mhm,
Especially like the first Mongoose, my previous graphic novel, I finished it in 2021.
mhm,
So every time I revisit it to a translation, it
mhm.
gets more and more hard for me not to change things because it's been 5 years since I drew it. So I'm like, ah,
Yeah.
but I don't, but I fight it because that's why you keep working and making new books and making new projects is so you can do things differently.
Mhm,
Knowing how to do a project is knowing when you stop working on it. So you can move on to do something else. But that's my process. And I already think I spend way too much time on my things. So I like to, okay, it's time to
yeah.
accept this and move on to something else.
Move on.
But
Man.
for me, sometimes it's a bit hard. But other
Mhm,
times, when it's something you already have enough distance from it, it can be endearing too. Like
mhm,
I recently rediscovered a graphic novel I made almost 10 years ago. And
mm.
now I kind of feel nice about it. There's always a period that you're like, I can't believe I did this, but it's awful. And then
Yeah.
when enough time passes, you look at it like, you're like, I can't believe I did this. So
Good.
it's more personal than a technical thing. It's definitely like you facing yourself in the past. And
Mhm.
that comes with everything. I think it's a very universal experience in that sense.
Yeah, they say time heals. You know, you
And
can
I
look at a
do.
picture of yourself from 5 years ago and you're like, what the hell was I thinking with that haircut or those clothes? But then 15 years later,
It's
you're
very
like,
close to that feeling,
yeah.
actually. It's kind of much that feeling, to be honest.
You had said something about once you've finished with it and it goes out into the world, then it becomes somebody else's. It's the readers. They bring whatever it is that they're bringing to it. And I feel like this is part and parcel with
Yeah.
that. And in this case, you then become a reader for your own work. Okay, so how did you get involved with Pow Pow, which is a Quebec-based publisher? You're in Portugal. There's a lot of water in between. How did you guys get together?
I literally was in the right place at the right time. I think it's one of the occasions. I had finished the Mongoose, which is the previous graphic novel,
Mm,
and I did it with a grant. That means that I had some extra money, and I used it to go to TCAF because my dream was to go to TCAF at the time, and it's still one of my favorite festivals. It was
mm,
my dream at the time. I was like, one day I'll manage to go to TCAF because I realized, and I look back now, it is still true. Most of my favorite cartoonists are all Canadian. And I
mm,
realized, where are they? They are in TCAF or MCAF. So I have to start somewhere.
mhm.
CAF was around the corner. I got a plane ticket. Actually took my sister with me and everything. We made a whole trip around.
Okay.
And I had the book finished and I didn't know exactly what to do with it. And I thought it would be, well, I want to start new in terms of publishing and everything. And obviously, I also wanted to, more than everything, have my book published in another language. We're talking about earlier about Portugal is a great community, but we still have the barrage of language. And I know if my book was published in English or even French, I would have
Mhm,
more readers, which is something exciting. So I noticed in the programming of TCAF, they had a portfolio review, and I applied. And that's how I met Luke. Pow Pow was there, and I think it's the only publisher I wanted to see because I knew their books. I had some of their books already, and I was like, well, the book is finished, and I don't mind hearing another no. But it was a
Hmm.
very pleasant surprise. So we met there, and a year later, the book came out in French. Yeah.
So many little things to come back to about your career before we get to physical education. This balance between local community versus global marketplace, right?
Yeah.
Like the,
Correct to
you
put
know,
it.
what, so you have the internet, you have access to all of these things outside of Portugal. What
Mhm.
is it about the local community that keeps it a part of your creative landscape, other than the fact that you're just physically there? Because it seems to still hold a very special place in your creative landscape. Talk about being a global
Mhm.
creator as well as a Portuguese creator.
Nobody ever
If you
has
can make
ever
sense out of
asked
whatever that was a
that.
question about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good thing to think about. It's a good, I mean, I can put things this way. What I learned about going to festivals abroad,
Hmm.
because I started to go abroad, and like TCAF was the furthest I managed to go. I think I went to SPX in 2018, and that
Oh.
already felt like, oh my God, everything was different. But it was pre-pandemic.
Hmm.
I don't know if I know. It felt like it was in another lifetime.
Yeah, yeah.
But
It is exactly the same. I live in Baltimore, but DC is really close. So SPX, I've been there like,
yeah, it's super
I don't know,
close. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
probably 15 times over there. And, I went last year and it felt exactly the same as it
I always
did
wanted to come
pre-pandemic
back.
or,
I mean, we're 2026. It's almost been 10 years
yeah,
since.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I guess
It'll,
the thing is, like you were asking earlier about the community, and the thing is, like when you come from a small country such as Portugal, and we don't
mhm,
have our own history, you if you want to make something out of comics, there's no other choice but to go abroad, because even if I'm
mhm,
a top seller in Portugal, it will never be enough for me to live from this. It's a fact. Even if I
mhm,
was the best-selling author, which I'm not, but if I was the best-selling author of everything, we still
mhm,
have very few readers. It's a small country. So there's always an expectation of going out there and see what's there. And there's also the
mhm,
factor of internet that already makes the world feel much closer, and even before I went to festivals, I mean, I'm part of the blog generation, Tumblr generation. So
mhm,
you're already putting all your comics online. I grew up with web comics, very like scan to blog web comics.
mhm,
And it's because of that, it's because I found out that the comics community internationally is so big online that I was like, okay, I want to know where these people are.
mhm,
And I started talking about festivals. The first one I went by myself was in the UK. I went to the Leeds Thought Bubble
mm,
Festival. I went there 3 times. I tried to always find the advantages. And one of the advantages to go to Leeds was because the flights from Portugal to the UK at the time, before
mhm.
Brexit,
Right.
were considered cheap. So a student like me that lived with their parents, no other obligations, I could
Mhm,
easily set money aside and go there for a weekend. And when I got the grant, I could go a bit further. But it's
mhm,
always like when you come from a small country with no culture of comics, you always want to go abroad. The first reason is like we never have enough readers here if you
mhm,
really want to comics. Obviously, the internet makes everything easier. But I also learned by going to comics from a very early age that applies to arts or markets in general. Like, yes, internet exists and it's great. It's amazing to have a big follow on Instagram, but nothing substitutes personal contact. I went to festivals, yes, but I was sending emails to publishers almost every week.
mm,
That never led me anywhere, to be honest. The good contacts that I made, I had the luck to make them in person, which is a bit, I wouldn't say it's sad, but I do recognize it's a possibility and a privilege that it's not
mhm,
accessible to everybody. So
mhm,
I'm thankful that I had the opportunity to do it. Although Portugal is a small country, it's I can easily travel within Europe. It's very easy to
mhm,
travel around, even if you don't go out by plane. I was in the financial position to be able to do it, so I took advantage from it. And now things are a bit different, obviously, but at the time, I saved all the money that I had to travel to festivals. That's pretty much what I do. But that need to go to festivals so often is because
mhm.
I really wanted to find more people who like comics. I realized these cartoonists there, they all share one thing in common. They're in Canada. I'm going to try to go there somehow. And then I managed to go, luckily. And yeah, that's always a bit connected to community in a way. You want to find people who like the same things as you, someone you can speak about bubbles and panels with. I guess I'm still always trying to do that. Either it's abroad or it's in my street. I guess I teach because of that. I teach because I love talking about comics. I love thinking about them. I love meeting other people who love it as much and inspiring people to follow it. When you do a craft, whatever that is, and that's what artistry shows us, people meet together. Painters always hanging out in groups, in coffee bars and whatever. And I think we're all doing the same. That's why we have conventions, because we all want to talk about our favorite comics, right?
Yeah.
And that's everything.
Yeah. It's interesting. I found it interesting being part of a community, like you said, getting some sort of inspiration from them, maybe validation, hearing from your peers about what it is that you're doing. But I would assume there would be some sort of navigation of that, like what you can take away and then what you can leave behind. You'd mentioned something again in an earlier interview about the reception from your Portuguese peers when the Mongoose came out. You had said that a lot of your peers saw it as a downgrade from your earlier work. And you were like, okay. Your reaction to that was great, but I found it a little bit surprising. And maybe this is a translation thing, but like the downgrade word in
And that's
particular, that's almost worse than saying they didn't like it. It's like they're disappointed, you know? And you're like, and again, thinking about your career, that was you making a real shift in wanting to do comics a certain way. And you were confident enough that you were not thrown by that comment. But can you unpack that a little bit? Like what that meant coming from not your family necessarily, but like sort of, yeah.
no, I know.
I'm
I
probably
think
having a
what
harder time with it than you did when you heard it. But I was like, that's
no, I mean,
weird.
and it's I think what I meant at the time when the Mongoose came, a lot of people were a bit puzzled, or at least some people came to me puzzled. The book still had good reviews and everything, and I also,
Yeah.
on the other hand, there's a lot of people that still say that the Mongoose, they liked it. I was not doing comics for a while, and when I finally do, I abruptly changed the style, and for some people that was a bit confusing, which I think is completely understandable. But one or two people said like, Joanna used to draw nice, and now she draws this strange. And I think it was just one or two people, and I found it funny.
Yeah.
And honestly, I find it understandable. I think the Mongoose for me kind of marks a period when I decided to take a different approach in comics. And there's a very simple reason why the Mongoose looks the way it looks. It's because of a matter of I did it in residence, and the residence place thought I was going to do an animation. So I didn't have paper, or it was hard to find paper. I didn't bring my supplies to draw because I thought I could buy them there, but then I didn't. And the easiest outlet was to just do it digitally. Before that, I was heavily inspired by Gillian Tamaki, and my work really resembled her work in an adorable kind of way. And then after that, I was like, okay, I'm going to draw digitally. So I decided to, okay, if I'm doing digitally, I'm going to try something completely new. And that's why it looks so different. And I went to see other reference, and then it looks different. And I learned with that, and I started, and I actually really enjoyed that process. It was refreshing, you know. And I realized, and I think it's an attitude that we also have as consumers. I mean, I listen to music, everybody does. We always feel a little betrayed when our favorite band suddenly starts making another musical genre. Like, come on, I liked what you did. Can't you do that other album like you did before? I look back now, and I think that's the best way I can put it. I respect people that take a chance to leave like a style or a graphic language or a way of they doing things that is comfortable to try something new, especially if they fail. I really respect it. That's what I learned. I don't know if I succeeded or failed, but I'm glad now that I took that leap, because that changed the relationship I have with drawing. That changed the relationship I have with comics, and that changed what I want to do with comics now. The Mongoose changed a lot of things in me. Obviously, I want people to like my books. I'm still human, and I always like to have recognition. But I need my projects to feed me somehow. I need to feel like I learned something with them, if I grew with them. I think that's universal also for anybody who creates things. So I don't really care. I don't care. I think it's
Right.
funny. I think it's understandable. And I
Yeah.
think that the reaction of people, it's also part of what I say of the moment the books come out, they become the person who read it. I hope everybody who takes time to read it reads a different book, a new book. There's the book I made with my intentions, and they
Hmm.
mean something. But it's way more interesting, the books that the people read that have nothing to do with the book that I made. For me, that's the most rewarding part, is the people come to me and like, I read the Mongoose and I know it's about this. And I'm like, I guess now it is. I guess.
Yeah. You almost want to ask them to give you that book because you're like, oh, I want to read whatever book you're reading that made you think that. That sounds
Yeah.
really interesting because I didn't necessarily put that in there, but maybe I did.
Yeah. I had a fine arts education. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
I was taught the approach to the thing you do. It's always like an experiment in a way. There's
Hmm.
an experimental way of like, if I do things this way, what happen? You know?
Hmm.
And that makes you more detached of the final outcome and makes you more interested in the process. And with the Mongoose, that's what I learned. I'm really interested in the process. And then I'm interested not knowing what it's going to look like in the end. And then in the end, it looks like this. And then I reflect on it. That's the difference of everything I'd done before from the Mongoose. Everything I made before, I did it to achieve a goal. I
Hmm.
wanted to look this way, to feel this way, to talk about this way, work this way, and then I'll see what happens. So it's a different way of thinking. And that's why maybe I'm not so attached to what happens afterwards, I guess. I don't know.
Hmm. I think that can come from not having an industry to have to plug your work
Oh,
into.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that is really not a disadvantage, but turning your situation into a real advantage. And
Yeah.
because you don't have to contort yourself into a particular shape to
Yeah.
find success, you get to do things the way that you're comfortable with, and that seems just more sustainable. This post mongoose part of your career sets up the rest of your career rather than you having to do other types of things in a particular style that you may have grown out of, but
Yeah.
then like, well, that's what the market wants. So,
Yeah.
that's what
I
I'll do.
also do that type of work. It's not visible, but I do a
Mm,
lot of illustration for hire. And then I did a couple of comics for hire. And I have a style for that. I don't feel like an author there, and that's not the purpose. It's a different type of work. So in my
mhm,
graphic novels, I really want to just do something that I feel like doing and that I find interesting of doing without that barrier, like you're saying. And yes, I agree 100% with you. It's a consequence
mhm.
of not being subject to an industry that comes with
Yeah.
other consequences, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating having to navigate those particular conditions where you started and playing the hand you were dealt. You are probably maybe the fourth or fifth person I've talked to in a row who does comics but has taught or is also teaching. When I ask you what has that experience done for your work, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I mean, teaching what it does for
Mhm.
my work. Well,
Like interacting with students, having that
yeah.
open yourself up to all of these other perceptions about comics and having to take them in, but also guide them in a way
Yeah.
because they're coming there for your perspective. But it's not a one-way street, it's a two-way street.
Always,
What?
it's definitely two-way street. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I started teaching way too young and very mature and experienced. It's true. Yeah. I've
Okay.
been teaching for 10 years now, I think. Yeah. I started in 16 and it's changed my posture and my approach through the years in many ways.
Hmm.
But I realize you always come home, in a strange way. So
Hmm.
right now I've taught in different places and quite a few. And recently, in the past 3 years, I'm actually teaching in the university. I was a student. So it's a different type of,
Literally.
yeah, first you make peace with the place. Even if you're
Hmm.
angry with it, you make peace with it. And sometimes making peace with it is also accepting that some things don't change or some
Hmm.
things are in a way they are for a reason.
Hmm.
But the other ways, it's kind of like I feel very blessed somehow because I feel like I've been giving a second opportunity. And that gives you a strange compassion when you're teaching, but there's a very thin line sometimes because you can't be constantly projecting yourself in whoever comes to your class. That's one of the things that I've been feeling recently. But since I started teaching way too young and I was still a student when I was teaching, teaching kind of forced me to process and think and rationalize my process, which I haven't done before that. I thought everything was, I'll do because that's how I do things. And when you have to explain someone else something, you realize, oh, even though I do this intuitively, there's a reason why I do this intuitively. And when you have to, it's like you know a recipe by heart, but the moment you have to explain to someone that recipe, you realize the ingredients, you realize the reactions they make with each other. You also sometimes realize maybe I should put more flour. I have not been putting enough flour on this cake, for example. So I grew up a lot as a cartoonist just by teaching comics to other people because it forced me to question a lot of things that I took for granted or question a lot of things that I completely ignored. There's something else. I feel like I have to constantly be updated on what's going on in terms of comics because I'm getting more and more distant from the age of my students. I used to be privileged enough to have a very close age to them, so our references were the same. And now it's not like that anymore. So I try to read more manga, for example, because that's what usually my students like. And I need to understand why they like it, why exactly they see in it. It's always an empathy exercise because you have to understand what are the things that are important to them and try to get through them with that. Like I said, like I was a fine art student, and one of the things that I think made my time there a bit hard, there was definitely a problem of communication between us and the teachers. I'm not saying it was their fault, though. I'm just saying that it's natural that that happens because we're quite young and we're talking with experienced people. And sometimes we as young students, we don't have the maturity to understand things. And now I look back and I'm like, that's what the guys were telling me at the time. I have a massive compassion with my teachers now. Like, I understand what they were trying to say, but obviously as an 18-year-old, I have to learn it my own way. And I think that's sometimes my biggest struggle because sometimes I'm talking with them and I'm like, I really want to tell you this, but you have to learn this by yourself.
Yeah.
And I have to be able to just accept that and let them go and not mothering everybody, which is, you don't learn things that way. There's many ways to approach teaching, but for me recently, I've been more believing that it's about, I don't want them to think like me. I don't want them to draw like me. I don't want them to like the things I like. But I think in the time we're living right now, when it's so easy to have machines and softwares to do things for you, what can set them apart is remember that they can think. So I always try to approach them with exercises and assignments that they don't have an outcome necessarily, and they don't have like a specific thing to say. It's exercises that are designed for them to just think what they would do. It's what they did for me in that school, and I think it's more than ever. And I was still a student when Photoshop was becoming a thing. And I know that in 3 years from now, we're all colleagues. So we're all going to be in the same boat. I think that's where the community comes again. You're like, okay, in 3 years from now, or right now, we are all trying to do this. And it's also about that. And it's a complicated thing. Teaching is good because making comics and being a creative person or like working with creativity demands so much alone time. It's so easy for you to just become in your own bubble, in your own dome. And teaching is good for me because it also forces me to go out, see what's going on, talk with what are the young people nowadays, what are their concerns, what are they facing, and listen to them. I know this is a very corny cliche to say, but I learn more probably with them than they learn with me. And being very honest, even when it's a class that I struggle with. And I also start with time, just like in comics, the more I do, the more insecure I get, to be honest. The more aware you are of everything that's around, like, the less certain I am.
Hearing you say this, you sound like a parent. And I mean that in a good way. The student-teacher, the parent-child relationship, obviously they're very alike in a lot of ways, identical in some ways, but that type of relationship, just hearing you describe it, that's what it sounds like in a good way. trying to guide them, but you're not trying to turn them into little Joannas or little Felipes or whatever. You're like, you need to find your own path. And there is an empathy in there. And also that it goes both ways, right? There can be empathy both ways. And it sounded like you're realizing things now that you didn't know then, obviously. But you also know that you can't just tell the students, look, do this, don't do that, and expect them to follow you because they need to learn that over time.
Yeah. If they do something because I told them to do, they're not
Then they
learning,
didn't.
they're staying in order. And
Right.
I want them to find their own path, and sometimes that means failing.
Hmm.
And that's something that's really, really, really hard, especially when you don't like to fail yourself.
Yeah.
It's hard. How do you explain to someone that, like, hey, part of this is going to be about you failing?
Hmm.
You have to fail so you finally understand what you're going to do differently. But it's hard, especially if you have to grade them in the end of the semester.
Hmm.
And how it's so hard to, because you can't tell that, but it's hard to explain that sometimes it's better for you to fail a class than actually succeed in it.
Yeah.
They can't
Paradoxically.
fail. Like, and it almost feels like, hey, I want you all to fail. No, that's not
Yeah. Yeah.
what I'm saying. But there's, yeah, and the process and the way you are as a cartoonist and as a person, because that's
Hmm.
obviously intertwined. It's
Hmm.
deeply personal and intimate, and therefore that's why I don't want to tell them what to do. And right now,
Hmm.
I think we all want to kind of hear that sometimes.
Yeah. Have you had former students reach out to you with that sort of understanding? Or have you reached out to some of your former teachers to be like, oh my God, I get it now.
Yeah,
Wow.
I did. And when I started my PhD, I reached out to my master's tutor, which I haven't
Hmm.
spoken it since I finished my master's. And I finished my master's in the pandemic, so it was very underwhelming.
Mm,
Like, there was
yeah.
no celebration.
Anticlimax.
I didn't
Yeah.
see him. I remember, because that's what moves me to do today is the teachers who really did something for me. I think about them almost daily. It's crazy. And sometimes I wonder if they know.
Hmm.
And I probably don't. I don't know. I wrote my tutor, for example, and I told him, like, hey, just letting you know, I'm pursuing a PhD now. I'm only doing it because I had such a nice time in my master's and I learned so much. And I'm doing it in the hope that I would ever feel like that again. And just letting you know, it's also because of you. And I hope you're doing
Oh.
fine. And that. But I think that's something you do. I will always feel like someone told me this, would I appreciate it? And that was my criteria. So I wrote him
Hmm.
a little bit awkward, like, I hope he doesn't find it weird.
No.
But of course, I still reach out. And now I work with some of my former teachers from the bachelor. And
Hmm.
so it's nice to still be able to count on them in a different angle. But
Hmm.
I think that relationship of respect is something that lasts. At least from my side, I feel that way. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's
Uh,
that's another type of community as well.
yeah. Okay. So going from actual education to physical education, let's start
Yes.
talking about the actual book that you have coming out. So you've mentioned that you received a grant early on to do work. Laura, the main character, is a woman who has received a grant to write a novel. And the book covers a week in her life that is not quite the week you would expect to have after an inciting incident of getting a bunch of money to go do a thing. Before we talk about the book itself, I'm interested in, as a creator, and you can answer this either as yourself or maybe from your peer group or whatever, your relationship with the audience thinking a work is more autobiographical than maybe you intended it to be. Have you or your peers found that to be easy to navigate, or is that another thing where you just, once you finish with the work, you're able to really just cut that umbilical or whatever and just be like, look, people are going to think about me whatever they want to think, and not necessarily even in a bad way, but just like navigating that part of the creative process,
Hmm.
is
Yeah.
that hard
Yeah.
or easy or
Oh, it's definitely hard.
okay?
really hard, especially because the book is complete fiction and that people do it all the time. I do it myself also when I read a book or watch a film. There's a part of me that will want things, if things are real in terms of like if they are biographical, somehow it's almost like we believe more in the story, right? There's a thing like, especially when you do things that are more like slice of life, if they are completely fictional, some people get a little bit detached from it because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But making physical education was a bit of a turmoil kind of process because there's a lot of things in there that are true, and they obviously ended up in the book. Even my main intention was to make complete fiction, and the book that ended, so it's even worse than the Mongoose in that sense. The book that ended, it was not planned whatsoever. It was very improvised because I don't know how to work in another way. It became a very true book, but if that makes it even out of fiction, no whatsoever. And I think even though the character has another name, I know a lot of people want to believe and think, and I'm okay with that. It's fine because the book is true. I want it to feel true, and otherwise I wouldn't draw from my own personal experience. And the things I wanted to talk about, it's things that affect me. So obviously the book feels that way, and that's okay. If I have a hard time accepting that, I still have a hard time accepting that. And that maybe explains why sometimes I was a little bit uncomfortable with it and I had a hard time finishing it. So all that is in the book, and the book ended up being about it. That was not necessarily my intention, but at some point I realized, well, the book is about this and now it's going to be about this.
It is what it is.
Yeah, it's obviously about other things, but this struggle of finishing it, the struggle of coming to terms with it and what that actually means in a more deeper way, in a more personal way. It's a big theme in the book, and that comes from there. But Laura is fictional, the story is fictional, and there was no intention whatsoever to do something other than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have art questions. One of the things reading this that I kept thinking about was that it made me, this is going to sound stupid, it made me very aware that a human face is not a set thing, but it is in fact different parts that work in tandem. And in your figure drawing, you certainly play with different combinations of facial features, right? You will have sometimes character won't have eyes, they won't have a mouth, sometimes their face is just an outline, sometimes they have eyes but they're dots or whatever. Can you talk about the decision process when you draw a character? So there's a part of the book where you're talking about Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant, and you draw them totally recognizably, but there are no eyes there.
Yeah.
Why was that the thing that you're like, I'm not going to put this in there?
Yeah. Good question. I think it's the same reason of every other way I drew people around the book. The book is about detachment. That's what the book is really about, or at least that was the main idea, and that was the main theme, and overall, like, more vague in terms of global theme. That's what the book is about. It's about detachment, and I tried to use the story and Laura to explore detachment in different levels and different ways, from things that are incredibly superficial and boring to others that might feel a little bit more abstract. And I don't want to talk about the detachment with comics, and that's why I think it's a great language. I try to dismantle and explore visually and narratively what detachment feels like. That's why there's so many lack of eyes. Sometimes the book is in Laura's perspective because she's the main character, but because we see that week and that world through her experience of it. And there's not a lot of backgrounds, and not a lot of people drawn in detail. It's because she can't. She doesn't. She has friends, but you don't really feel intimate to them. You don't know exactly what they do when they're not with her. It's a completely self-centered person. It's a narcissistic person in a way. And even the celebrities like Julia Roberts, and first I wanted to play with the fact that even if you don't recognize them, which happens too, people are like, oh, who are those people? I'm like, oh, you're sure you don't know? So there's also that part of me of like, I want to see how many people can recognize Julia Roberts, I guess. But even with celebrities, they're just an image. I think that's kind of the play that I was doing with the book, because I'm making a book about detachment, and my vehicle is image. And playing with that in a world of social media, I think it was a very fun and relatable way to present that detachment, because we are in contact with images every day, and we never felt so detached from everything. Like social media became an icon for detachment. We're just like looking at people's vacations that we don't know who they are, and we follow these influencers and we feel like we're friends with them, but we never see them and they don't know who we are. At the same time, we follow this character that tries to create a routine in a stupid gym. And why is she there? Who knows? Who cares? And I wanted to play with that idea of like the people she feels closer to, or the people she can talk with, and the people that she doesn't. And that's something I learned actually back in fine arts, when we were studying some specific sculpture. I like the idea that even if you draw a close up, you can still see who it is, which I think it's a very depressing idea now that I say it out loud. But there's this beginning dialogue with this guy, and you have a crop of his face many times, and you will never know who he is. That's kind of the point. It's not like it's not a narrative device. It's not because who's the mystery, who's the guy. It's more like you don't like know. And so the reason why some people sometimes don't have eyes or face or nose, it's kind of to make you feel that, or also make you yearn to see who it is, but I'll never give satisfaction. You'll never really know. And I think that's that kind of discomfort that I wanted to create, because technically it's a book filled with people talking to each other, and in the end you can't describe anybody. That's that play, and I wanted to test that feeling. You can't really reach to anybody, not even the main character herself, I guess. If this makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. And again, I've got the PDF up, so I'm scrolling through it now. That is true, and it's also done in such a way, just from a broader perspective, that's so on the page, and yet it's not hitting the reader over the head with it. It's just such a part of the pages that feeling comes across without it calling attention to itself. I want to talk about color for a little bit. So first of all, cyan is the bluish color, right? I say blue,
Yeah.
but I was like, well, that's probably again non-art person. So I'm like, if the light is blue, oh wait, I think that's called cyan. Why that color as your online spot color?
You really want to know?
Sure.
It's
Why not?
completely random. I thought it
Oh,
looked nice.
okay. It does look nice. It's a color without being too, it's of a piece with like all the white and the black, and it gives something else, but it's not angry. Like it's not.
Yeah. I think if it was red, it would be a bit intense, right? So,
Yeah.
no, it's boring enough, I guess, and creates the contrast enough.
Yeah. And
There's
it's desaturated just enough
right.
so that it kind
Yeah,
of blends in, but it still
exactly.
gives. Yeah.
Yeah, it blends in. It doesn't really catch much attention. It just gives that little, let you know that, okay, now it's in the front screen.
Right. All
Yeah.
right. You you do a lot of subdividing. At least twice in the book, we see a cigarette being rolled. Okay, so
Yes.
pages, let's see, 14, 15, and part of 16 is somebody rolling a cigarette in, let's see, one, two, like 18, 19 sort of panels here. I feel like there are at least 4 or 5 different spots where Laura is changing, right? The physical, mechanical act of doing that is something that you use the comics language to stretch out or to highlight.
Yeah.
Is there a thematic angle to that? Is that more of a pacing? Because it certainly has an effect in terms of pacing and almost de-emphasizing or emphasizing the routineness of her taking
Yeah.
off her shirt and stuff. Again, that then plays in with the physical part of it, because you'd have to do that for PE class and you have to do it for the gym, which she's continuing through the thing. That sounded like a conscious choice
Yeah.
that you made. Why did that have to be the way that it was in this?
What do you think? What was your feeling on it?
I mean, in terms of maybe what I was just talking about, like it certainly, as I'm reading it and I see it happen the first time, I'm like, okay, but then it seemed to be a motif. Like she does it when she's going to the gym or coming back from the gym, when she's
Yeah.
with her lover at the end. It's that inescapable thing that we all have to do. And it is not something I expected to have to unpack live, but sure, let's do this. It's something that could be provocative if it were drawn in a certain way, but it's not.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're almost detaching from, like, if it were in red, if this had been the magenta spot color, this would be like red light district sort of thing. And this is like, nope, it's mundane, but you're not putting a value judgment on it. It's just like it is gray.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I wouldn't describe it any better.
oh, well,
Yeah, it's literally that.
okay.
I'm actually moved.
I'm sorry.
I'm actually moved. It's a
Oh,
beautiful, yeah.
oh, well, I
But
mean, you
like,
did the work.
I mean, until you put it out, I never thought about it, the connection between the rolling the cigarettes and getting dressed and undressed.
Mm.
But there's definitely a connection there.
One of the other things that I had is your use of the page. Some pages have grids, some pages don't. Some pages
Mm.
have partial grids. Some pages just have images that are in kind of grid area without the actual sort of grid around them. The majority of this book feels like it is panels on top of a white background, and in a very, not unhinged, very unlocked, a very floaty way, as opposed to sort of your traditional comics narrative grid, like a picture frame and this image is sitting inside it. All of that contrasted to maybe 15 or so pages out of the book where you have full bleed images or swimming. I'm fascinated by the contrast between those two, but also you're looking at a page and deciding how much negative space to have on it. How do I frame this? Does it need to be framed? Is it open? How much? The decision making between figuring out what images you need on a page and then how to not just draw them but comicize them. How do you make these pictures into comics? I
Good
don't even know if
question.
there's a question in there,
Yeah,
but
I know what you
okay,
mean. That's
right.
that's the $1 million question, right?
I guess it is.
The first response I can give you, like, answering that is why making a book takes so long. Like for me,
Mm,
making comics is exactly figuring that out. What needs 16 panels and what can I do full bleed? How do I organize this information in this number of pages? Because
mhm,
that's how I work when I make comics. I think in terms of information. And how am I going to convey that information? Is this like visual information or should I put it in dialogue? Is
mhm,
this something that needs pace, or is it something that I don't want to show that much? I learned a lot of that from studying film, obviously, but I know a lot of this comes from everything else, like from books, from music. That decision making is a lot of planned,
mhm,
but as much as improvising. I need to improvise a lot. To me, to come to those conclusions, I need to improvise a lot. I have a creative process that is necessarily chaotic, so I
mhm,
can have room to come up with solutions out of nowhere, if this makes any sense.
mhm, mhm,
I have a strict grid. That's all I have. And then in certain situations, the game for me is like, okay, you have a grid of 4x4. How are you going to organize the information around this 4x4? And that's sometimes when I realize maybe I don't need 4x4. Maybe I need 3x3. And that's how the thing
mhm,
starts to become different, because different emotional response needs different pace, different, and sometimes it's also depends on the tone that I want for that specific segment or that specific scene. For
mhm,
dialogues, when I want the dialogue to be the focus, it's more easy for me to pick a grid. It becomes more easy for the reader to focus on the dialogue. When
mhm,
I want it to be more focused on movement, sometimes I prefer to remove the grid and leave just single images. And other times, for example, the digital interfaces, they have no rule whatsoever because they overlap everything. So there's these main rules, and then making the comic is about how I go around them. I make premises for myself. Like I make myself exercises in a way, like I
mhm,
make these assignments, and then the purpose is for me to disrespect them. And if you're disrespecting the assignment and you know why you're doing it, there's a
mhm.
reason. I hate doing things just because they're decorative. That's what I mean by using drawing as a language. Everything is, nothing is accidental. And if it is accidental, it's because I want it to be, not because I cut it out. But obviously this process results from a lot of attempt or like trial and error. And that there's so many versions of this book before the one you actually see. And sometimes, it's like making a puzzle. It's very similar to making a puzzle. And I don't work chronologically. So I start, it's a little bit like doing as well. I use this with my students. It's like doing a math test. You start by doing the ones you know the answer, and you leave for the end the ones you need to think more. I usually am starting a book. I have these 3 or 4 scenes that I know exactly how they want it to look, and I use them as a starting point. And making the book is connecting them. And that means, obviously, in the end, I have to revisit them and do them all over again. I don't have one process in that sense. Making every book I made so far, they've always been very different. The Mongoose was more linear. I didn't struggle so much. This book was a complete mess to be made. I'm finally coming to terms with how much I learned from that mess.
I'm trying to remember timeline here. When you were working on, certainly with physical education, was Pow Pow already in place as the publisher?
Yeah.
So how
In my
was
head.
it? Oh, okay. I was saying, like,
in my heart.
you have this process that you're refining and you're stress testing and you're working with whatever. What is it like as a creator trying to work with a publisher and keep them not necessarily informed, but just sort of let them know that you're working and that you're doing what needs to be done if you're not doing a more standard, like, okay, here's my script, here's some thumbnails, this is basically the thing. What's that like?
If you really have to ask them, because
Okay.
I think on my side, the people I worked with are extremely patient. I can tell you that, because especially with Educação Física, I missed the deadline 2 times. And unlike the one before, was first published in Portuguese, and that was with them that I signed first. And obviously, in the meantime, I met Pow Pow, and obviously in my mind, I read it. I told them right away, like, hey, I'm working on a new book, and I would love you to take a look. So they waited for me to finish it, and that was it. I always take more time than I want. So I can tell you that since I work that way, I don't make a script, and now I'm going to illustrate the script. It makes really hard for the people who work with me. And all I have to say, I'm very thankful for their patience and the fact that they are okay with that. Which I know that if I were in the mainstream industry, I would have a really hard time. And I probably would make, I don't know. But I think what comes as well, which is a nice thing when working in the type of comics that I do, is that there's more flexibility. At least with me, the people I worked with were always very respectful on that. And when I needed more time, there was understanding on that side, which I know it's very rare. But yeah, I work a lot on my own. I'm very nervous about showing things in process. Sometimes I really wait until things are like 80% done to be like, okay, here it is. And I'm very insecure. When I'm working, when I'm in the middle of the process, I'm extremely insecure, and I have to change that.
I mean, on the one hand, if this is the stuff that we're getting because of that, don't monkey with the process too much.
Right.
Yeah, that just sort of begs the question of, as you're working through this, as you're following your sort of own path, you're in the community that you're in. When do you reach out for feedback? Do you reach out for feedback? Whose feedback cuts through the noise to be like, oh, they probably have a point, I should consider that?
Well, first of all, my partner, he's the first one. Thinks he's also a cartoonist, so I believe he has a really good taste.
Okay.
He thinks very differently from me. I guess that's one of the things that I actually like to ask feedback about. I like to ask feedback to people that I know for sure that they don't like or do things the way I do. That's how I know if things work or not, in a way. Because if I'm going to ask feedback to Joana, likely that I'm going to get the answer that I want, and we're going to both like it a lot, and things are great. It's more daring, and I have a hard time sometimes hearing it because, once again, I'm very insecure. that I like to hear from, especially people that I definitely admire. That's when peers also become like a good resource because so I have a few trusted people that I know when the time comes, I can ask them for feedback on my very, very almost finished
Oh,
version of the comic.
okay. So it's still well into the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I'm trying to change that. I mean, I live with my partner, so he's way too
Mhm.
aware of everything I do all the time because I bother him daily with everything that I'm thinking about the book, especially if he's not asking for it. And but to change that, I'm doing
Mhm.
something for the first time, which is I have this journal every day that I have a thought about the process because I'm making a new book now. So every
Mhm.
day that I have a thought about this book or something that is going to be important for it, I write it down. Just like a little, I'm a captain on this ship that is the book.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then every
Mhm.
day I'm like, day 3, today I thought it would be nice to make it red instead. And so
Okay.
I'm doing it mostly for myself, obviously, and
Mhm.
to remember the process, which is something that doesn't happen with it. I don't remember making physical education, which is something that it's only coming to me now a little
Mhm.
bit. So this new book that I'm working on, I want to remember everything and I want to completely immerse myself in the process again, as it happened to the books before it, physical education. That will also include asking more feedback if people are willing to, and definitely be more present when I'm making it. Sometimes too much improvising makes you also, once again, ironically, detach yourself from the process. And I don't want that this time.
I, f- I find the idea capturing thing fascinating. First of all, fascinating that you could get 2 books out not having that type of tracking for your thoughts because so much thought went into these. Um,
Yeah.
Looking at my notes, I think so. The Mongoose is out. Physical Education is coming out in English in May. You said you're working on a new book. What can you tell us about it? What can we expect? Anything? Even nothing
Surprise.
is fine, but you know.
It's very baby, so I'm still keeping
Okay,
it to myself.
fair
But
enough.
I know I have to do it in 1 year, so it's not going to
Oh,
be long.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But it's still baby. It's still very, very small
All right.
baby.
Well, from small acorns grow mighty oaks. I think
I
somebody,
hope so too. Let's
I
hope for
hope
that.
somebody. So, in terms of your outreach, over the next year or so, you've talked about going to festivals. If obviously the world is in a different place than it has been previously, what does your festival calendar look like for 26, maybe
All right.
27?
So far, it's mostly TCAF. I'm going to be
Okay.
in TCAF. Everything goes according to the plan. But before that, actually, this is random. But next week, I'm going to Poland for a Polish
Oh,
festival. It's in Poznan. It's my first time
oh,
in Poland.
oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
that's
Um,
a good perk of making comic books is that
yeah,
sometimes you get to travel with them, and that's really nice.
yeah,
You get to
yeah,
meet
yeah,
new
yeah.
faces.
Yeah, it can be a super lonely, isolating experience up until it gets you on a plane and sends you to some far off land where you get to talk to
Oh,
people.
I wouldn't put it any better. It's the good
Uh,
payoff.
about that. And it's an incentive for you to keep striving to get better and striving to improve, that the work will be better received and you'll get to go to even more exotic places and
That's
things. Although I
great.
personally think I mentioned his name up at the beginning, Paul Gravett still holds the record for being the most jet-setting person in comics. I've had the chance to talk with him maybe a couple years ago now, but he's like, "Oh, I'm going to Manila to do this, and I'm going to South America to do that," and he's a very well-traveled man.
I really like his books. I
Yeah,
read a
well,
lot of
yeah, yeah,
theory
yeah.
when I
He
read
is.
my
And he's a joy to talk to because he's just so comics and he's so positive. And he's literally world traveler. He's like, I have to talk to my partner and my family about going somewhere around Christmas because I need to go open this new exhibit here
Yeah.
and do this. And I'm just like, man,
Yeah.
people have all the
Believe that
luck.
Paul is walking so we can run.
Yeah. He is the man at the crossroads, as Eddie Campbell so elegantly put it. And I stole it. Thanks again for listening. Remember, we have a bunch of episodes coming your way in rapid succession over the next few weeks. More Steve Bissett, Aditya Bidikar, both solo and in spruced up combination with John Workman, J. Marshall Smith, and even more after that. Please feel free to like, subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you are given the opportunity to do so. It really does help the word get out about what we're doing here in the Robots from Tomorrow section of the multiverse, and everyone here would greatly appreciate it. So until we meet again, my name is Greg. Stay safe, keep enjoying those funny books, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening. Systems disengaged.